Hello, everyone. I'm really happy to see you here, and thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest. And welcome to First Frame, where visionaries become collectors. We all know that the art market is evolving. A new wave of collectors is emerging from the world of innovation, startups, investment, technology. And what really draws tech entrepreneurs to art? How do they approach collecting differently? First Frame is my attempt to learn, showcase, immerse myself in the new mindset of a new generation of collectors, where innovation means traditions. Through conversations with experts, collectors, entrepreneurs, I will examine how a new generation of visionaries is really reshaping the art world. As someone who's deeply involved into both sectors, art and startups, having served as a director of investment platform, an art manager and art advisor for many years, I see immense potential in understanding and bridging these worlds. And I'm happy to introduce my first guest today, who I'm really excited to host today is Véronique Chagnon-Burke, a specialist in 19th century French landscape painting and art criticism, art market, and the role of women in the art world. She served as academic director at Christie's Education for many years and has helped to shape the knowledge of countless art advisors, art historians, collectors. Her current collaborative project, the Women Art Dealers Digital Archive, is a digital platform mapping the role of women art dealers played in the institutionalization of modern and contemporary art. Hello, Véronique, and thank you so much for being here today. It's really a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Daria, and I'm very happy to be here to share a little bit of insight about collecting with your audience and again, continuing the conversation with you. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. And actually, I really wanted to have you first before speaking with collectors, because I want to gain a deeper understanding of collecting itself. And who better to guide us through these explorations than someone who has educated generations, enormous amounts of professionals and collectors. I'm certain your insights will really help us to, to have this foundation for everything that will follow next. So let's start. And basically, my first question will be kind of a personal one about personal experience. I would even say intimate in terms of like art. Because it's something about establishing the connection with art. Do you remember the first artwork that truly captivated you? It's not necessarily something that you bought, but the one that made you think, oh, I really want to be a part of this world.
It's an excellent question, and I always welcome the idea of remembering how I got where I am. One of the things that I think made it easier for me maybe than for many people to really get into the art world, into the art, was because I grew up in Paris, and I was really fortunate that my father took me to the Louvre and stuff. But if I think about, so I can remember myself very little, 4 or 5 years old, maybe on Sunday morning, going a couple of hours, looking at these big paintings, not really being unhappy or happy. I loved also reading and especially looking at the images, because reading was a little tough for me as I started. But really, my first encounter with art, something that told me it would become my profession and I would probably never want to do anything else, was when I visited a Francisco Goya, the Spanish painter, at the Orangerie Museum in Paris in the 70s. So it's a long, long time ago. And what struck me and what stayed with me was the way the paintings were hung on the wall. And for some of you who are familiar with Goya, you can kind of probably think about his beautiful portraits of fancy women, Spanish women from the court, but also his very political and very dark paintings. And for me, what really started my love of art history and art in general was the contrast between a very small painting by Goya that was late in his career called Saturn Devouring His Children. So quite a complex and difficult subject matter from mythology, where you had that figure, that kind of figure of a Saturn as a monster and holding some limbs of his children. And on the same time, a couple of rooms later, they were the beautiful portrait of the Spanish court and the Spanish Maja. And I remember the gauze and the lace of the dresses, the beautiful way Goya handled the black and the transparency of all the materials. And for me, that contrast between something horrific, something that was more out of a nightmare, and something that represents the quintessential elegance and beauty of another age really drew me in. And I was like, what's going on there? Why is there that someone could be, so immersed in beauty and at the same time being able to open his soul to us and show us some of the darkest things? So the power of art to transcend words was really something that drew me into art from the get-go. And from the get-go, I knew I didn't want to be an artist. I have absolutely no talent, but I continued working. And when it came time for me to decide what to study in France, I went for art history, and I've never left it before. And one of the things that I would say to the people that are listening to us is, not only art enriches your life from a public way. You could go to the museum, you could go to the art gallery, you can have different things in your house, but it's also a way to connect with humanity and to connect all of us, especially in times where things are a little complicated. So I love the way art brought together all the world. There were history, there was literature, there was music, there were very often politics and sometimes philosophy. And all that for me was better than studying any of these single subjects separately. Another thing that I find essential is that as an art historian, as somebody involved with art, the more you learn, the more you see, the better you get. And I think that's also something we'll discuss, this idea of training your eye. And it's a journey, and it's a lifelong journey, which makes your life much richer.
Thank you. It's very interesting, yeah, because I would say that it's not then like an easy way to start. And Goya is, especially this topic, it's very hard to understand. It's very hard to like make a step into this world through this painting. But at the same time, I'm thinking like it's always my question. I have the same opinion as you in terms of art. Like this is something that really unites the idea of humanity, the whole aspects of person's life, all the aspects. And I'm thinking, even if it's like so much about ourselves, why it can be so hard to start collecting and to make this first step into the art world. Starting a collection can feel like very intimidating, and there are countless opinions, unwritten rules. People are afraid of this world, industry norms. Some of them, like can be like really valuable insights, but others are myths that can hold new collectors back.
Mm.
And just people who are interested into art, they also have these, problems with understanding how to make the first step. So my question will be like, working with collectors and educating the future ones, art advisors, historians, what are the biggest misconceptions you've seen about starting art collection? Or even like to just have conversations with people. Maybe you have these fears that you've heard from people that are just wanting to even to know more about art, and maybe what do beginners tend to get wrong while starting collecting?
It's an excellent group of questions, I think, that really highlights the kind of the kind of fact that on one level, access to art for most of us is quite easy, but at the same time, the next step is sometimes more difficult. I would say one of the things that is essential, and one of the things that is probably easier to do than it was before is education and self-education. The fact also to understand that the art world is a very pluralistic place. So, of course, when we open the art magazines or when we watch our newsletter on our internet feed, we very often are confronted to a kind of an art world that seems very remote from everybody's life. You know, we're talking about $1 million paintings, evening sales at major auction house that looks like celebrity outing where everybody is looking at each other. We can be very intimidated by the fair. Going to a place like Art Basel for the first time can be being fine very, very kind of overwhelming. But I think education of the eye is really the beginning, and establishing trust with someone that you feel has your best interest in mind. By the best interest, I would say the interest of growing your eye and growing your taste with you. So I would say, as an art advisor, which is something that I sometimes do on the side, I would spend probably more time in a museum, in a museum show, in a gallery, speaking to the future collector, trying to understand what that person is, and also relying on building the confidence of the person. Because one of my great mentor in the art world is a wonderful art dealer named Michael Finlay. And I really recommend your audience to look up his books. He has a wonderful book called Learning to Look. And one of the motto that I have adopted for myself, even as a collector, even if my collection is very humble, is you collect with your eyes and not with your ears. And I think one of the major pitfalls of the early collectors is to just think too much about what they hear and not trust as much their eye. And the building of your your kind of connoisseurship, the way you can approach painting, only comes with time, only comes with being confronted with art. I know that I would say for the last maybe 4 decades, maybe a little more, there's a lot of emphasis of the idea of art as a commodity. And that's, for me, a very different type of collecting. If you're really interested in art as a commodity, art for diversifying your portfolio, it's a collecting that is very much like managing your stock. You gotta get the blue chip artists, you gotta know the ones, and at that point, you're not building a collection to serve your soul and to nourish your mind and to make yourself happy. So first, I would say first major advice, trust your eyes. Don't think too much about the retail value and will that grow, will that not grow, will that be a good investment. And again, to share another anecdote that Michael Finlay shares with his audience and in his book, he says, I started being an art dealer in the 1960s in New York at the moment where Soho was just a budding community. I tried to always buy a couple of works of art from each of the show I put together because anyway, nobody else was coming to buy art. And now, 50, 60 years later, I look at my collection. Some of the artists I love as much as I've loved from the get-go. Some of them have become very important blue chips artists. Others haven't had the same way. But my interest, Michael Finlay says, his interest in the art has not changed. So again, maybe a basic advice that sounds really too much like common sense. You should collect things you love, things that speak to you, works that maybe challenge you. And historically, there is this really great anecdote when Gertrude Stein and her brother Leo saw Matisse the first time. They looked at that portrait of Madame Matisse and they couldn't make sense of it. She had a huge green stripe on her face. He was using this fauve color. He was developing that new movement. But they felt that there was something, some energy, some power in this work that allowed them to transcend and to go beyond their taste, which was much more, maybe at that time, more traditional, and they could feel something. So I would say really education, build a relationship of trust with someone who can help you in that educational journey. Because really, the art world is a complex beast, and your reputation and trust is the only thing that is really there, because there's no, legally it's kind of a mess. So I would say, trust your eyes, develop your eye, find somebody you can trust to engage and have conversation. Don't be afraid of challenging your taste. And really just think about, when you enter a gallery or when we enter an MFA show, for instance, you just feel the buzz, feel the feeling, look around and see what draws you to the play, to the art. And then there are other issues to get into consideration. But I think to go back to your question about the pitfall and what are the mistakes the first collectors do, is maybe sometimes not to be trustful of themselves and maybe to trust the gallery. And I've seen this a couple of times where someone would come to me and say, look, they're proposing that painting to me for that much money. And then my question to them would be, well, first of all, how do you feel about that painting? Would you live with it forever and ever? Do you feel that this is something that's going to bring something to your home, to your family? I mean, is this something you feel? And then do your research. Do not just trust what the gallerist is telling you. You go on the internet, you go in the books, you go in the museum, you compare, you contrast. You never rush, and you never succumb to the pressure of the gallery, who can be really extremely perceived salespeople. And I would say, be aware, be I would say cautious when someone start telling you, how great the artist is going to be, how great investment is going to be, how there are other ways to find if an artist is doing well than just his price or her price. So I think caution, but also trusting your eyes through your own education and connection with somebody who is trustworthy and a bit maybe neutral.
Thank you. I completely agree. I maybe even can add like a small point regarding the new collectors, because you're completely right that people are a little bit afraid of, like these big numbers from the auction sales. But I think that this idea that art is only, can be only so pricey, so difficult to get, is also completely wrong. And I think it's the beauty of collecting. If you're starting, like really to educate yourself, if you're starting to go into collecting, but with the small checks and really developing your eye on the way, it can't be some mistakes on the way, because it's something that you are choosing. It's so completely personal. And I think it's a beauty of this process. And I think it's sometimes you can compare it with people and relationships with people. You can't always say that, for example, this person will stay with you for the whole life. No, but you can feel something. You can go into this and you can try. And I think it's something that is really similar to collecting.
Yeah, I think to add to that, Daria, if someone feels compelled to collect, and it's interesting because historically we know some of the great collectors like David Rockefeller, for instance, obviously came from a family of collecting. Obviously, when he used to see his father, he could go down to his office and he had, the beautiful tapestry that are now at the cloister of the Unicorn. So he grew up obviously surrounded by art in a family that believed that art was something important. At the same time, when he was little, he'd collect beetles. and things like this. So this idea of collecting, it's sometimes psychologically interesting, and actually psychologists study the reason why people collect. And so in a strange way, you could say yourself, okay, why do I want to collect? Do I want to collect to impress my friends, and then I need a kind of a quote unquote trophy collection with the big names that everybody will say? And that's kind of like what maybe the Gilded Age, Nouveau Riche used to do to assert their position. But most collectors, I think, and I see myself as not a collector, but somebody who loves to be surrounded by art, connect with the object, sculpture or painting or photography, because something drew them into. And then eventually, maybe 20 years later, they'll go back and they'll say, yeah, that work is maybe not at the same level of quality, but I was just starting, as you said. So it's not really a mistake. It's kind of learning along the way. And again, I would say, look around you in the local place where you are. Identify maybe a local gallery, a local art school that may have an MFA show, in the US or in Europe, there's usually an exhibition when the students finish their art school. That's a great way, not just to connect with the artist, but also to develop a collection. And I've helped, first of all, you help emerging artists like this. And when I walk back in my house in New York and I look at these objects that or these paintings or works of art that I have acquired at these MFA's exhibition, it's interesting. You see the beginning of an artist and then you can follow them. I would also say, maybe start a trusting relationship with a gallery you like. And you said people are afraid, they're afraid to be, especially if they have a good level of income and they can start collecting already at a higher price point. You just don't go in the gallery and say, here I want to buy this painting. It's again that building of trust. You go to the opening, you introduce yourself to the director, you show interest in the program that the director is doing, because remember that the responsibility of the gallerist is to nurture the artist's career, to make sure that the artist is going to be in the right collection, to find recognition in institution. So it is the responsibility of the gallerist to sometimes be a bit like a gatekeeper, to worry and to make sure that the person that is going to acquire the work, especially if it's an emerging artist that is getting a lot of recognition and very fast, that person is a good collector. It's not going to flip it a couple of years later to make money. So I think it's collecting is a wonderful thing to do, because it puts you in the center of a network where you can engage with artists, you can engage with galleries, you can engage also with scholars, and don't forget to go to the libraries, the museums, to kind of get to know curators. It's nearly a social, I would say, a social activities, where it's not just about going to the gallery or to the auction, bidding, and then bringing the painting back. It's really building a community around your interest, and engaging in deep conversation, I would say.
Yeah, and I think here we touched a really interesting point, not only about why people are collecting, but also the way people collect art, because it's really evolving. It's becoming very different. For example, we see reports and interviews from Art Basel Hong Kong 2025, and we see the first insights on the behavior of collectors. And we can see that dealers are saying that collectors are less into buying multiple pieces. Instead, they're focused on acquiring a single high quality work, whatever that might mean, actually, because not sure about this definition. But anyway, understanding these shifts is really something that help us to see where the market is heading, what is going on. And from your experience, do you see that newer collectors approach art differently? Is it somehow connected to the really generation of collectors, or it's more about just something that is happening on the market. Have you noticed any key shifts, how people are making their decisions in the art world, and really what are the reasons for it?
Well, that's a really great question. I think a good way to kind of measure this, beyond just what I can share with you, is to look at what's happening at the auction houses, because as we know, it's not always easy to find prices of works on the primary market in the galleries, despite the fact that now there are internet tools and things like this that are making it a little bit easier, and that after COVID, because galleries had to kind of open their kind of digital sale room, we became more accustomed to see a price with a work of art of the primary market. But the auction market, I think, is a good way to kind of understand where the market trends are going. And as you said, also obviously going to the fair and feeling the atmosphere and reading the reports on that. Obviously, there's this great art report, Basel art report, also reports on the high net worth collectors that are very useful to get that data. But for me, what I think is interesting is that new collectors seems to be less interested in the kind of historical aspect of collecting. When I was talking, for instance, about the traditional way the Rockefeller family collected since the beginning of the 20th century, thinking about building a collection that will kind of talk to who they were as people, the kind of money and the kind of power they had through their money, the interest they had, let's say, in European art, being in the United States, their interest in like the classical masters like Picasso, Matisse. I see this kind of fading away. I also see a challenge because a lot of the younger generation has learned to live with dematerialized objects. We've lived through the screens. If you talk to people that are interested in the decorative arts, for instance, furniture, this is something that's a big problem actually for the market, because very few of the new the new generation of collectors are interested in the same kind of furniture, the same kind of decoration that I would say not even their parents, but their grandparents had. So I think this idea of a really bourgeois apartment, well decorated with masterpiece, with work of art that talks about who you are, the taste that are matching the furniture, this is kind of totally gone, totally disappeared. People move around more maybe than before. What do you do with a lot of furniture, a lot of decorative arts, a lot of paintings? I think also I remember when I was working at the auction house at Christie's already a few years back, at the beginning of the tech people making really major money, and the auction business always being like, who is the next generation of collectors? Are they the children of the people that collect? And they were trying to figure out, and galleries also were trying to figure out how to attract these new collectors with a lot of discretionary income. And I don't think they've managed yet. I know that Pace Gallery went to try to open a place in the West where the Silicon Valley is. They had a couple of interactive exhibitions. Nothing really came out of it. People thought that maybe this new generation of collectors would be really interested in AI or digital art, but it hasn't yet gotten enough traction. And I think while there is a lot of interesting initiative in recent auction, for instance, at Christie's, there was a really interesting recent auction of AI. The academic community, the curators, we're not yet there in terms of understanding. And there's a lot of issues about copyright and intellectual property. So I think the shift is probably that people are less object oriented and maybe more accustomed to the idea of maybe dematerialized objects. It's a difficult question, and we know that we have some of these kind of a celebrity younger collector like Justin Sun, for instance, who's bragging about buying works by people, but also by Giacometti. One thing that I think is more, I would say, a general shift is this idea of, as we live in a celebrity culture where everybody can say what they do and what they feel and what they bragging on the internet and things like this, on the social media, there is less distance, and things are going a bit too fast, which I think is never really great. There's an issue, and we can see how quickly she changed. If you look at the market in 2018, the ultra contemporary artists, the artists less than 40 years old, were making a lot of money. Suddenly, their work were taking off for 1 million, for 500,000, and that has not been sustained. And a lot of these artists that make the headlines 4 or 5 years ago are now not doing as well. So you ask me about the shift, and I think the shift is that things are very chaotic at the moment. And I think the socio-political, economical atmosphere is not helping. And I don't actually know how it's going to all pan out, and how things are going to evolve in that way. But I would say the trend of a lot of younger collector working already in a dematerialized world is going to be an interesting transition for me to look. Will they flip this and just go and like only AI or digital art, or will they go back to more traditional work? That is still something that I think we are waiting to see.
It's very interesting. I think it's like really one of the reasons why I want to have this series of interviews and, like, talk to people, understand their motivations, because I completely agree with that thought that, we're not about materialized thing. We're really moving a lot. Me, like, I can also talk about myself. Like, I'm a digital nomad for many years, and it's really hard for me to collect art, not because I don't want to do this, but it's like because I don't have a place where I can place it. So digital art for me is kind of a solution in some way, but also maybe it's not only about moving, because we're also have like different motivations of why people do or don't do these things, do collecting, for example. So it's very interesting, and I appreciate your thoughts and your vision from the perspective of auction houses, for example, from the perspective of art advisor, and just like your personal experience of having these conversations with collectors. And I think that starting art collection today is both like easier and more overwhelming than ever. There are so many access points, but at the same time, you don't know where to begin. It can be really challenging. I think that will be my last question for today. I know we talked a lot about this, like, first steps, but maybe we could just, summarize like top 3 pieces of advice, and maybe even not just advice, but kind of an action plan. What should I do? Where do I need to start? Because I probably won't be able to go for, to go to Art Basel tomorrow, right? Or whatever, but maybe I can make some small steps.
Yes, I think small steps are really important. First of all, I would say kind of do a little bit of introspection. What is your goal? Are you interested in collecting because you like to engage with contemporary artists, emerging artists? So at that point, I would say, try to go to the MFA show, Find out in your neighborhood or in the city you live if there are emerging artist gallery, co-op galleries, galleries that are organized by artists. Get to know them. I would say a very interesting entry point is also work on paper. You're not you, and it's never about millions of dollars. In the US, a report is looking at transaction, and I think the average work of art transactions for less than $1,000. So in a strange way, we could say nearly all of us could become collectors. So I would say identify what the reason why you're interested in art. And it's interesting because there are some people that never want to speak to the artist. There are some people that are only interested in old masters or even contemporary artists, but they don't want to speak to the artist. So figure out what your interest is. Is it the support of an emerging artist? And then, identify a couple of them that you can follow, and you can, make sports purchase and buy directly from the studio, and then follow them to their gallery. I would say the other step is find a gallery that you like and that you trust and that shows works of art that seem to match your taste, and then try to get close to the person that runs the gallery. So I would advise to go to maybe a smaller gallery, a gallery that is owned by one person, two person, not one of those mega gallery where you just become a name and that's not interesting. And you won't be interesting. It's so much about rapport, and because trust the galleries to make you discover things. So I would say look at medium like work on paper. If you're interested in contemporary emerging artists, really get close to the people at the end of their MFAs or when they start getting into find a gallery that is like a kindred spirit in terms of what they show and what you like. And then I would say go to the museum to kind of build your basis. So by the time you get to the contemporary gallery, you understand how we've gone from Renaissance, to Cubism, to Surrealism, to pop art. Because I think that's what's important. Read a lot, magazines, things like this. Get yourself kind of pick out a couple of really good newsletters that you can trust, or read art criticism, which is a good way for you to develop your own language when you can talk to people. That's, I think, is a good step. And another step is, if you can, go to the fair. Go to the fairs. And you don't have to speak to people in the gallery. You can go, but you got to learn your territory. You're going to learn your geography. And by going to a fair, especially a major fair, you'll be able to start putting a hierarchy among the galleries. Like Art Basel, for instance, they have special part of Art Basel for really the emerging galleries. And then also identify, that would be, so I would say education. That's my first step and my last step, Daria.
I completely support you. I had a chance to be your student, so I completely agree that lifelong education is something that is not only connected to art, but it's like something about the whole, all the aspects of our life. And I would maybe even like add one more point, that just like stay curious, curious about yourself, curious about art, about maybe new hobby, maybe something that will guide you, through your life in like many years. You never know. It's always a great variant to start with some first small steps.
Yeah.
So yes, thank you so much, Véronique. It was like really, really interesting conversation, and I do believe that we today explored this foundation of the collecting, and it will be like really great base for me to explore it further with tech collectors, entrepreneurs, and other art professionals on the market. So thank you so much for being today with me.
You're welcome, Daria. It was a pleasure. Always nice to think about collecting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And see you all in the next episode.
Thank you very much.